Hi, everybody. Welcome. I'm Barry Kostrinsky. This is ATOA, Artist Talk on Art. ATOA is a 501c3. We're the longest running dialogue on the visual arts in the country, and originally were formed around 1974. All our talks in the past were live talks on the Lower West Side of New York City. During COVID, we've switched our format. We've gone to Zoom presentations every Monday. You can always find us here. And yes, as things get better, we will go back to in-person talks at 12 West 12th Street, the First Presbyterian Church in New York City. We will also keep this format as well. So to stay tuned to everything ATOA, look at our website. It's atoanyc.org. Again, we are a 501c. We accept donations. If you'd like to donate, you can find links on our website. And we now have PayPal, so we make it very easy for you to contribute. Again, you're contributing by being here. We're artists talking on art. You're the artist, and really that's what brings us together. We do have all of our previous talks, or at least most of them, listed on our YouTube channel. The link is on our website. And our historical archives are with the Archives of American Art. It's a branch of the Smithsonian, and we're in the process of updating the last 5 years for their archives. We do have a reestablished programming committee for talks to come. If you'd like to submit an idea or anything at all, you can see information on our website about it, and always feel free to reach out to me. I'll send you the form. And the programming committee, which is meeting about monthly now, you're all welcome to join. It's just a question of reaching out and saying so. Tonight we have an exciting talk. Through the last 75 talks, certain themes have come out over and over again. And I don't know if it seems odd, but play is one of them. And I certainly like that idea, because as serious as art is, sometimes play can open up a door to something very serious and lyrical and sort of combine. It's not always rationalism and thought that is behind seriousness. Sometimes play and creativity and imagination come to work. And so it's something we've heard over and over again. When Aviva Dorfman proposed this talk, Creativity and Play, I just love the idea. I think this is a talk that is more superstructure of a concept. And so I welcome it. I just think it's great. She's invited Ray Wetzel. The two of them are going to present together back and forth. Ray showing his art, Aviva showing some of her students, and of course, addressing many things like process and things like that that have come up over and over again. You know our format. We like to encourage questions at any time, and also thoughts that aren't questions. If you want to make a statement, feel free to just jump in. Keep in mind, if you don't want us to hear what's going on, mute yourself. Zoom speakers tend to be, or your computer speakers are very sensitive, and we will hear your conversation with your husband when you're telling him what not to do. So having said that, feel free to mute, unmute, and as well, we have a chat function. If you just want to post a comment or a question, I'll read them from time to time. So thank you all for coming. We've assembled a nice group. I'm going to hand it over to you, Aviva Dorfman, and first, thank you. And I will say, I'll give a little background. You're coming in from Michigan, and I'll let you both fill in the rest.
Okay. Hi, everybody. So I'm Aviva Dorfman.
And I'm Ray Wetzel.
I am not an artist, although I like to think that I have artistic sensibilities. It's good to know about me, I guess, that my first degree is in dance. So I was a dancer earlier on in my life. But now that has become Zumba. So I am still a dancer, but not for performance sake. I teach early childhood education at the University of Michigan-Flint, and I teach courses on play, on curriculum, on integrated curriculum, on materials, on emergent mathematical thinking, and on assessment. And I've been thinking about play for a really, really long time. And the more I think about play and read about it and try to engage people in thinking about it, the more I see it everywhere. And it begins to be something that I hear and I analyze sort of almost automatically. So when this idea came up, I wanted to invite my friend Ray, who is an artist and also teaches art, to tell you a little about his teaching, because it lends itself beautifully to my analysis. And I think it's really interesting. And every time we talk with each other, we learn something more. So let's start with a little bit of a definition of play. So I'll give you a background. Do you want me to do the sharing? I'll do the sharing. Feels funny because it's your computer.
You can touch my computer.
Okay, so here we go. Oops. There we go. We want to start from there, and I want to move this out of my way so that my computer just went to sleep. There we go. Oh yeah. Okay. Oops. No, it's not going. There we go. Okay. So usually people say, well, play, you know, that's fun, and it was interesting to me that in Barry's introduction, he talked about play and the word serious came up, and he said, but it's play, and he painted it almost as though it was a contradiction. And I want to say that play is really serious stuff and fun is really serious stuff. So let's talk about why fun, what fun it is, and why fun is so important. Why is it not moving anymore? I don't know. Okay, here we go. So Brian Sutton Smith is a play researcher, and he wrote an introduction to a book that I used for many, many years as the textbook for my play class. My students are people who want to work with young children, and elementary school teachers want to be elementary school teachers too. And the challenge of trying to teach them about play as something serious is kind of like running against the current of our culture. So one of the things I always do is we have a 3-hour once a week meeting, and we play for an hour. Now that we are all online, they still play for an hour, and they have to document it in a way that shows me that it's been a whole hour. So one of the things Brian Sutton Smith wrote was that among the mutations, he says, that have become advantageous to us as humans in evolution is one that lets us practice all sorts of ambiguities in a way that's safe. So he talks about how we can role play, we can imagine disasters, we pretend play, all kinds of things, and then we find solutions to them in our play. So his fantasy is that fantasy itself became a mutation that has made living with life's maelstroms of emotion more tolerable. In a sense, rehearsing potential disaster has been a kind of inoculation against all those negative feelings: anger, fear, shock, disgust, loneliness. And while joy, just as play prepares us for difficult emotions, it's also really a great source of joy. And Ward and Dahlmeyer wrote in the National Association for the Education of Young Children an article about rediscovering joyfulness. And they distinguish joy as a mood, which they say is often fleeting, whether joyfulness is a state of being that is long-term and of significance, enduring significance. So joy, they say, sounds like the science of children engaged in drawing and the busy hum created by purposeful activity, punctuated by the celebratory sounds of new discoveries. I'm assuming that the art studio is similar to the studio that in my class, when they get to work and it starts quiet, and then the hum begins, and then there's a little explosion here and a little explosion there. And it's just a beautiful thing when this is going on without me. So let's think about play. I'm going to set it up so that we can see the relationship between play and creativity. play is very hard to define. And there is no one single definition that I have found of play. There are multiple definitions. However, play has a bunch of attributes that many, many people refer to. And among them is that play is free choice. It's freely chosen. The second is what we call non-literality. That's the pretend or make-believe or imagination part. The third is that it's intrinsically motivating. You do it for itself and not for any kind of external reward. The fourth is it's process-oriented. It's not about the outcome. It's not about the thing that results. It's really about the process itself. And children, in fact, are so delighted to play that they will learn to self-regulate their own emotions and sort of subjugate their own goals and learn to cooperate with others because they want the play to continue. And if they insist on their own, then people will leave and the play will end. So process orientation is incredibly important. It also requires active engagement. So it can be mentally active. It doesn't have to be physically active, but often it is physically active. And it's emotionally meaningful or relevant. I think that might be all I want to say about it now, but I want you to hold on, if you can, to this list of attributes in the back of your mind, because they will come in handy for when I analyze what goes on in Ray's classes as he teaches people who are creative people and are trying to be even more creative as artists. And we'll talk about the connection between play and creativity as we go on.
Oh, okay. So that's good. Now, I'm going to start. My idea tonight is to talk about, I teach a variety of classes at the University of Michigan and at the College for Creative Studies in Detroit. I don't know if you're familiar with it. It's for Michigan, I guess, nationally, it's a pretty good design school, especially for automotive kind of stuff and product design. We do have a good craft department and art department there too. So there's just the full gambit of it's a really good school. The students are there to make art. And then the classes I teach at the University of Michigan are in the residential college, and I'm working with mostly like LS&A students, not so much art majors. So I have kind of different approaches for both of those classes. And then the third thing I'd like to sort of bring up when I start talking about stuff is a class that I'm a student in, and how I think the teacher reaches us and teaches us to be creative in something that seems to be fixed. And what I'm talking about there is a yoga class where the poses are supposed to be this, you're supposed to do them a particular way. So I kind of want to talk a little bit about like how I think that those three things have different ways of thinking about what a creative process is like. So maybe I'll start off with, do you guys want to see some pictures of the things that I've made just to sort of like get to know me a little bit? Think about that. So I do pretty much like, I'm a sort of a directionless mixed media artist. I sort of do whatever I kind of feel like doing, which probably links itself back to the fact that when I see or hear something, I kind of immediately become interested in it. Like I want to try that, I want to do something. So I have certain materials that sort of speak to me and they come up. So let's see if I can share the screen here with that. And we'll just go to, where'd mine go?
Yes, it's there.
There it is, right there. Great, share. And we're gonna go all the way back to the very beginning. Sorry. Okay. So here's a piece that I made a while back with some found object, which was the neon. I was really doing a lot of stuff early on with neon light. And I still use it whenever I can find like scavenged pieces of neon from an old building or something like that. So this is a piece that I made, and it's just all about the right angle. At the time, I'd sort of been just reading some thoughts from Klaus Oldenburg, and he thought that the right angle was a very important sort of idea and concept. And I like the idea of just wrapping it with this bird netting and putting the sticks through it, and just the quality of the way the light came through there. Just pretty straightforward. It's like one of those, as an old professor of mine used to say, what you see is what you get kind of pieces. Nothing really much to read into it. this is a more recent piece, so I put things together. Once again, you can see I'm still using sort of the neon found objects and altering them with, some organic materials. There's a photograph in here. I have this 2 photographs superimposed over each other. A stick that I painted yellow. For me, there's this sort of like, just the subconscious gathering of materials. I think they all go together, and I called this piece Blue Meditation. So I was just thinking about, it's much bluer in person with the light. So there's this, just a little painting. So inserting pieces of steel, I like incorporating steel with paint and with scratch marks and things. Don't too much to say about that. And then almost like a little self-portrait that I did some time ago.
Hey, I want to ask you, looking at some of these works, some artists come to mind. Could you share with us which artists you respect or like, or you feel maybe either influence your work or you just enjoy their work?
I enjoyed, like early on, well, actually I have to say that one of the things that I use the idea of, I guess you can see Joseph Campbell influence like in a piece like this. It was somebody I was really attracted to, and I find his work really wonderful. And then sort of how I did my sort of own interpretation, not interpretation, but I wasn't even necessarily thinking about him when I made this, but all that stuff was in the back of my mind, or, when I was making something, bringing things together sort of on the subconscious. I use a book for one of my classes, 200 Years of American Sculpture, and there's an article in there by Rosalind Krauss called The Magician's Game. And she thinks of David Smith, Alexander Calder, and Joseph Campbell as 3 very important people in the formation of American sculpture. And one of the reasons she likes Joseph Campbell so much is because he uses the idea of play and games and the subconscious, and allows that. I think his pieces can seem very simple, but the magnitude of what they opened up for other artists to think about is pretty incredible. Allowing subconscious and play to come into the way we think and pull things together. So that's kind of what I was thinking about with this piece. I suppose this is in sort of more of a romanticized view of something to a certain extent. I like the handprint down there because I also thought that most of my early work was about change and things changing. So I like to have something in there that's going to change, like the feathers are going to eventually fall off. There's a skeleton. That process of moving through time is kind of how I was putting together something. And of course, I no longer look like that. But that was a while back. And then this last piece, I think it'll go. Did it stop moving?
No, you have to put the cursor on your.
Oh, on the work, okay. All right. And then this piece here was something I like to paint with gouache. So I have a lot of tiny little gouache paintings that I do, and I really like playing with gouache and painting. So this one was sort of, we discussed a little bit earlier, it was just like a little painting about, along the lines of some, my thinking along the Buddhist idea of like getting past your fears. And so the little burning house with the gold roof is symbolic of that. There's a little bit of the what's that? What's the word for it? Caduceus, like the healing branches over here that allow for growth, and then the duality of light and dark that sort of resides within each of us. So it's a little painting, but if you start to unpack it, I think there's a lot of stuff to look at or think about. Yeah, like I said, I'm an undisciplined mixed media artist. I do kind of whatever I want. But I really like incorporating like straight up raw materials, steel, sticks, things I find like in the work.
I do want to read one comment in the chat. Larry Wheatman says, and he quotes Ralph Waldo Emerson, the man or woman who can make hard things easy is the educator. And I think we see it all the time when we see a master potter. What he does on the wheel seems so easy. And there is that thing where it looks very easy. and it's explained easily. And he also, from seeing your work, he mentions Man Ray, and I think that's great because Ray's handle on Instagram actually has Man Ray, I think it's 007. Of course, quite a unique combination of different characters there. But yes, good pickup, Larry.
Yeah, and of course, Man Ray. Yeah. So yeah, anybody else have anything they want to ask about while we're on this little thing, just to get to know me a little bit? Okay, and I'll switch back. Stop share. Great. Okay, so one of the things I notice a lot when I'm teaching is that when I ask students to play, it's like, oh my gosh, what does that mean? They're so used to having a task or being sort of a task-oriented sort of thing. So what I try and do is use process or making as play, as creative play, because I feel like all of us, in order to move forward and to keep making things, we need to have a good practice, and practice should be play for us. And I want students to try and learn that their practice is actually how they play and how they move forward. The big thing about working in a school situation is that they also have each other to bounce ideas off of and to fill in the missing pieces, the things that they're not seeing or finding when they communicate and work with each other. So I try to build my classrooms around the sense of community and having everybody work together, not do their work and not show it to each other. It's very much you've got to share with each other and be part of the classroom. So one of the things I think about when we talk about creative process was, and I was remembering this from high school, which was a while ago. But anyhow, there were 4 things that stuck out with me in the creative process from the early psychology class was ideation, which is coming up with an idea, and then the incubation, like thinking on it for a while, what's going to happen, like where you're doing the dishes, and something happens, I got the idea suddenly, and then probably something more like trial and error, although Aviva knows the actual terms for this creative process stuff. I was just sort of it's like trial and error, practice, working on it, and then finally your creative action or the implementation of your idea. And it goes through those steps. And where students get, I think, locked down sometimes is during the incubation part, where they think, and they don't do. So what I try and do is set my classes up so that doing is very important, because it's going to keep you moving. It's going to keep what I'm calling a creative engine going, where your practice makes you do that. So I don't know if you as artists do the same thing. Your practice is important, that it takes you to where you need to go next. So I feel like it's an important thing to instill in a student so that they can continue to do that through the rest of their careers. So yeah, that's kind of in a nutshell how I kind of view that. Trying to reduce anxiety, I think also is like students don't want to make mistakes. And so trying to let them know that that's part of that process too, is that we make mistakes and we learn from those mistakes. I kind of really like it sometimes when the demo you're doing goes off the rails and it's just a total crash. And so you have to kind of pick things back up again and show everybody that that's okay. And I think that's really relieves a lot of people, a lot of students' early inhibitions about trying and failure. So we have like thinking on stuff too much, worrying about failure. And then the last thing is that Aviva and I really talked about a little bit is like when the students focus only on the product, they're not engaging in the process. And when they're not engaging in the process, they're not playing. They're not learning. They're not learning the valuable lessons that process has to teach them. So when I use process, I also mean play. Process and play are kind of like the same thing. Yeah.
In fact, if it's not process oriented, it's not play. So there's a real overlap with the process orientation is incredibly important in my mind. And when students of young children, when students of mine, I'll engage them in an assignment. And for example, in the class about materials, we go and we have a unit on different materials together, or the students do a study on their own. And as part of the study, I have them play with the material twice. I have them observe the children before they play, then they play and they read about it, and then they go back and they observe the children again. And I ask them to compare what did they see the second time in the second observation that they might not have seen because of having played themselves or read about it. And I then ask them to make some plans for how would you provide this material to children in the future. And strangely enough, I will get a student, for example, this term, she wanted to paint. She created 2 paintings. She learned an incredible amount from the first one to the second one. She knew that she needed to prepare more paint the second time. She realized she needed a thicker canvas because the first time her canvas tore and she had to figure out how to fix it, and on and on. And there were some things about the actual creation too. And then in her plans for children, she said, and I would tell them what to paint. And I thought, what? Like, why would you give them a picture to copy? You just learned how important this process was to you. If you give them a picture to copy, then they're going to try and reproduce the picture you gave them. And a lot of them are actually going to be ruled out and pushed out by frustration rather than being deeply engaged in the process and wanting to do it for its own sake. So this process thing is incredibly important. And this is a large part of the piece that I hear over and over again, that by being process oriented, the stakes are lower and then you can engage. When the stakes are high, there's going to be this thing that people are going to look at, or I have to sell, or it has to be up to what I did last time, and on and on and on. It creates a lot of pressure, and it actually pushes people out and makes them afraid to engage as opposed to inviting them in for deep engagement.
Yeah, and that's things like even in my classes, they try and set up an assignment that's pretty open-ended, and that's kind of terrifying to a lot of students when you give them that free choice, because a lot of them want to know what they need to do, or especially what do I need to do to get an A. And that's the first thing I strike off the plate. I just say, first of all, I don't care about your grade. I shouldn't say that out loud, but I think the grade is the not important part of the class, especially when you're being in a creative class. So I want to take that away as much as I can. I know people do have to do their assignments and they do have to follow through, but don't think about the grade. Think about what you're making. So this idea of free choice can be kind of really kind of scary to a lot of students. But if I get them involved in a way that allows them to just start making things, that kind of goes away. There's a lot less pressure on things after that. So
I just want to interject that we have now heard 2 of the attributes of play. One is process orientation and the other one is free choice. And as we hear more, I'm going to interject with more.
Okay.
I do want to read, Ray, I do want to read a comment or two and bring up a question. First, Larry Wheatman says, the mediocre teacher tells, the good teacher explains, the superior teacher demonstrates, the great teacher inspires. Nice thought, and it's by William A. Ward. And Larry definitely agrees, process equals play, yes. And Alyssa Pritzker asks a great question. How do you position experimentation within the way you teach?
Oh, so do you want to go first?
No. I want you to describe in a class in the context of a particular course.
Well, like this, for example, one of the classes I teach is called How to Think, and semicolon, and then in this case, it's cyanotypes, images, and the creative process. And I teach the class, and it's got 2 things happening. We're doing a weekly photo assignment because a lot of students, I think, need to get pushed out of their comfort zone and just think about photography a little different than they normally do, like with their camera and taking snaps. The class is set up to be really low tech. Like we use you can use your phone and Snapseed, which is an app that's like really good for what do you call it? Messing around with photos.
Editing.
Editing photos. Yeah, that's it. So we use that, and then they start taking pictures. And at the same time, we're making cyanotypes, learning the process, mixing the chemicals, learning how to make a good print. Then I say, okay, now let's start to do something to these good prints that you've made. You've figured out how to make a blue one. Let's change the color. Let's lay them outdoors. Let's put them in the sun. Let's let things happen to them. Let's see what else this medium has to offer. And eventually they sort of come together, and we have the digital, I make digital negatives from some of the photos, and we start printing, and it's really kind of fun the way to watch the transition of, this is once again back to like non-art majors, seeing how like these convergent things come together, and then the stories that they start to tell with the process and with what they've learned from each other in the classroom is pretty amazing. So I really enjoy that. So I get them to do it just by coaxing them and letting them do self-discovery. Okay, here's some chemicals. I'm not going to tell you which ones to use. Try them out and then share this with each other. Like that's how I kind of encourage in that specific sort of instance experimenting with just within process there. So
yeah, so I think, I mean, so one thing we hear, so we've heard free choice, and we've heard process orientation. I just heard also active engagement. So here's another one. So if you're choosing to do it, you're actively engaged, it's a process orientation, you're invited in. Often, and then I heard Ray also say fun. So what's fun about it is it's rewarding. You're doing it for its own sake. Stuart Brown, I don't know if you've ever heard of him. He has a great TED Talk about play. He wrote a book about play a bunch of years ago called, I'm going to tell you what it's called, Play, How It Shapes the Brain, Opens the Imagination, and Invigorates the Soul. If you look him up, it's a really nice TED Talk. And he talks about the fact that play has two attributes that aren't listed in the general ones, but I think these are important here. And one is that play has inherent attraction and continuation desire. People want to play. They're really sort of, it's almost like tunes and shaving a haircut. If you saw Roger Rabbit, you gotta do the 2 bits at the end. If they don't hear it, the tune explodes. There's something about play that draws us in as humans in a really very powerful way. The other one is continuation, and what he calls continuation desire. And that is, as I described before, the way people will subject their own goals in order to be able to keep the play going. I think that these things are really important, and that's what draws the student in. So even though they know that they have to produce something at the end, because there's all this experimentation going on, and because it's process oriented, and because the environment is such that the experimentation and the mistakes are okay, they're more willing to get engaged in like, oh, okay, that didn't work. I learned from that. Now I know I can do this other thing. So I think it's really an interesting unfolding in the way the process is designed. Ray starts with, at the same time, this technical look at the cyanotypes, as he's also getting them to focus on the subjects that they want to photograph in the quick without having to deal with the techniques of doing it. And it's like, I'm going to steal your line, but the oldest way of making photographs and the newest way of making photographs, and they start far away and they get closer and closer, and then they converge.
They crash into each other. It's kind of fun to think about that. I mean, with Anna Atkins being like an early user of photography, basically direct printing is making a big comeback these days too. You see a lot more of it everywhere. Just because you can use cooler paper and get better, funner images and things like that. So
I do want to read one comment before we go forward. Olga Alexander says, process is play. Play can't be directed. I lament the inability sometimes to just go out and forage for materials and dumpster dive as I once did. even researching periodicals at random, which would lead me down many paths, have been minimized since libraries have moved their periodicals, etc.
Mhm. Yeah, that accidental discovery of walking into a bookstore and like with a completely beautiful section of like archaeology. There's a book there that you didn't know existed. And all of a sudden you have this whole thing that opens up to you, that sort of discovery there. Wandering around, okay, if we talk about that again, if I go back to Joseph Cornell, he's going to, that's what he did. He wandered around to secondhand stores. He bought frames, he bought stuff he found, he put it all together. That's kind of a really cool thing to think about. So yeah, I think I kind of miss that. I kind of miss that sort of adventure too. And we ask our students are asked to think so much more conceptually now, like right from the get-go about concepts, and I think that's really difficult because that's only part of the process of making something. Like Ross King Brunelleschi's dome. One of the things that stuck with me from reading that was like, hey, yeah, not anybody, but we've designed this beautiful, gorgeous building, this beautiful dome. How do we build it? So the idea that making something isn't an intellectual process is wrong. It is an intellectual process to figure out how to build something. Hope you don't see that. I couldn't agree with that more. And I use that as an example all the time when I'm working with my product design students, because they seem to be much more focused on product and outcome. And that's just because of the nature of the field that they're in. But getting them to think creatively is not so much creatively, but getting them to play is more difficult. I'm gonna, when we go to that section, I'll show you some pictures of a process book that somebody put together.
So do it now.
Do it now?
About
Okay.
that class, yeah.
All right.
There also is a famous story about Brunelleschi and his dome. It was quite an inventive construction. And to show everybody how important he was, he actually left the site for a month or so, and they couldn't do a thing without him.
Yeah.
I will say, Olga Alexander has a comment. She says, exactly, Ray. Can you comment how digital may have changed process art?
Oh
And
my
I
God.
guess maybe she's asking for the better or the worse, or in how.
Well, we can't really just say it's bad, because there are a lot of ways to use it, but we can't separate it from the actual act of making and process. I think I see students try and do something totally without. It just looks. It sort of looks a little machine made. It has that sort of feel to it. But there are aspects of, like, within the process of furniture design where we might want to make a template for something that we could then go back in and carve, so we can get some accuracy from things. And let's see, the one thing that I have noticed that has been detrimental is the students I'm getting now in the arts are much less, their fine motor skills aren't as developed as they were in the past. I have to go back to square one, basically, like when I start working with new students about using their hands to make something. It's really showing up quite a bit in the last 10 years, over 10 years since I've been teaching. So I think if there is a detriment to it, it's that we don't involve our hands in that physical kind of play and moving and making things. And I think that would be the downside of it. But I think that digital technology can be very useful. For all of us, we can make use of it. But I think you have to still maintain your sense of play and using it as a part of what you're doing. That's just my own opinion. As far as that goes.
So yeah, I mean, I probably have a similar sort of thing thinking about young children. It's incredibly important for young children to use their muscles and to use their bodies and to use their hands and to get a feeling for what materials do and how they behave. I don't know if you've ever heard of the marshmallow challenge. There's an activity where they get people together and they give them 18 minutes and they have a certain number of stalks of dry spaghetti and one marshmallow and some tape. And they tell them the goal is to build a structure that will elevate the marshmallow as high as it can above the surface. And it turns out from doing this over and over again in different groups that there are two groups that excel at this, or more than other groups. The first is engineers. Well, that doesn't surprise us because engineers know a lot about material, at least mechanical engineers, right? They know a lot about materials and they can figure that they could probably calculate all sorts of things. But why kindergartners? Well, it turns out that the reason why kindergartners do this well is because unlike the adults who sit together and talk and talk and talk and talk and make a plan, and then they build it, and lo and behold, they put the marshmallow on the top and it collapses, and now there are only 30 seconds left in the time. The kids do it right away and they learn iteratively. So they fail, they do it again, they fail, they do it again. And by the time the 18 minutes are done, they're actually able to get that marshmallow to the top. And there's so much to be said for actually doing stuff with your hands. And when children have the opportunity to do in their bodies, they actually have more confidence. An early childhood art educator whom I know wrote a book about beautiful stuff and engaging children in loose parts. And in a workshop I did with her, she engaged us in an exercise which I have since used many times. And she says, if you can get the children to do it in their bodies, they have more confidence. So she gets the children to stand up, everybody stands up, and she says, imagine you only have one joint and it's in your shoulder. And now move your arm around and see what kind of marks you can make in your shoulder. And then she does it from the elbow, and then she does it from the wrist. And of course, the scale is really different, but it reawakens in them the muscularity of drawing, so they get away from drawing the things they've quote unquote learned how to draw and gets them back in to playing with the medium and finding out what kind of marks they can make, where they can make them. And once they've explored and they know what this thing can do, then they can start playing and figuring out what they can do with it. So this business of the digital, getting children away from the 3 dimensions, is actually really important. And I think we will be seeing it down the road. So it's one of the reasons why I'm very engaged in getting my students to work with children in materials, because I know that they're not getting it on their phones and on their tablets and all that stuff.
Yeah, and I think we've all seen that experience, that people are really attached to their phones in a way that's really, it is what it is. So we're just going to have to figure out a way to move forward and try and get them detached a little bit. But getting back to this sort of like idea of the intellectual process being part of being making and process, I'll just go and talk a little bit about, I'll share the screen with the, I'll just share the screen. Okay, and I'm gonna skip past these things.
I just want to remind everybody, this is ATOA, Artists Talk on Art. We're a 501c3. All our talks are free. We've been giving talks since 1975. If you'd like to contribute, all the information is on our website. So thank you, everybody, for coming as well.
All right, that sounded great. Let's go on with this then. So what we've got here is a first page of a process book that a student put together from the furniture class that I teach. It's a bent plywood furniture class. And along the bottom, you can see some paper exercises. So that's the first moment I sort of ask people to play with paper, because when you're playing with the paper, it emulates a lot of the things that we can do with the bending material that we have to work with. So these are the students' initial sort of attempts at playing with paper. I give them a few prompts because as I said, the blank piece of paper can be very disturbing to a lot of people. Like, where do I start? How do I do something?
Yeah.
So anyhow, this student in their process book included all of their little paper models, and the one down here at the end is the one that they decided to make their piece from. I'd like, getting back to that digital thing, I have 2 years ago, I had a student in the class who did all of his work entirely on computer. So he had an iPad He drew everything on the iPad, hardly ever even used real paper. So the first day of class, I had them spend like 2 hours at least doing this. My class is like a 6-hour block, so you can imagine. And then we did some other stuff. But at the end of the class, he was so frustrated by working with actual materials that he told me, this was the worst day of my life. And I thought that was pretty funny. But anyhow, 2 weeks later, he dropped the class. So everything was easier after that. So this shows like the students' concept for the piece. And then they have to do sort of a actual, we call an orthographic drawing that shows the exact dimensions of the piece that they're going to build. So now they're actually starting to think about the actual process of building. How does it go together? What size is it? How do the pieces relate to each other? How do I make something imaginary real? Here's a scale model of the piece. This is like a quarter scale model. You can't tell because it's a close-up photograph of it, but they went through the exact process to make the model that they would have to make the full-scale piece from. And so that was very instructive for them. So now they could take it to the next step. So in order to do a bent plywood piece, you have to build a form that you can bend the plywood over. So this box here shows the construction, because you've got these sort of ribs and then these little cross pieces that sort of create those little boxes inside there, because when the bag goes over it, this is a vacuum bag, it puts pressure downward and inward. So if you don't have the little braces on the inside here, the forms can collapse. So she needed to make 2 forms, this one and this one. I think you can see the cursor, I'm not sure. And so here's the piece in the vacuum bag. So you can see that the plywood, there's like 6 layers of plywood that have been bent around the form. So she had to make 2 of these. And then we had to be able to put them together. So there's a lot of stuff that's going on here. It's hard to explain exactly what goes through a person's brain when you're involved in the process like this, but there's a lot going on. There's a lot of learning that's happening, and there's a lot of physical challenges and engagement. You can't just walk away from this and come back like 2 weeks later and pick it up. You have to stick with it. It almost becomes, the process becomes your practice here. And this after the pieces are pulled out of the bag, you can see they need to be trimmed and then assembled. So this piece shows the problem of like, okay, so I need some support where the weight is going. The plywood's not super strong, so it needs to be put together in a way that allows the plywood to carry the weight. And then the connectors for each of the halves that go together are these sort of floating tenons that go ahead and hold the whole, and join the pieces together. So there's that joinery connection going on. Student testing the piece out to make sure it actually can hold weight. And then the final piece, which has had a secondary skin or veneer put over it. Really nicely done. So what does that mean though? Now the student on their own makes this piece. This is in process, but they did this because now they have the confidence to go forward, design and build, and know how to continue to experiment and play around with this process that they've recently become familiar and engaged with. So within a class that has sort of a predicted outcome, there's going to be a product, and the product is going to be furniture. We have this other aspect that comes from becoming familiar with the process, playing with the process, understanding the process. Now we can be creative with the process.
So I saw that Olga asked this great question. She asked, how is this play? The materials are directed, the object is directed, and so is the intent. But the truth is that, yes, there's an intent for the overall class to have a product. The student gets to choose what product they're going to create, what materials they need, how they're going to, and then the techniques have to be chosen and they have to be practiced. So materials will always constrain what you do, right? They have certain things that they afford and certain things that they don't allow, almost like a game. A game has rules. It has rules for what's required, what's permissible, and what is forbidden. And materials are like that too, actually. And they define some things, but the piece of this that is play is, first of all, this is free choice, and there's choice in what to build. So the student chooses to take the class, and they choose what they're going to build. It's non-literal in the sense that they have to imagine what they want to do and design what they want it to look like. It's intrinsically motivating because they've chosen it, and apparently there's something they want out of this piece of furniture. It's process oriented when the process is what you're engaged in, and you're not going to be graded for the product. And the environment is supporting, focusing on the process as you go. It's active engagement, certainly. And I think that once you define something like this for yourself, it's emotionally meaningful or relevant. All of those are the attributes of play. So it's in some sense more play-like, or because it's going on, aspects of it will be more directed in the sense that certainly the techniques have a particular goal and we have to use them with that goal in mind. It isn't free for all, but then most play isn't either, right? If you're playing golf, if the goal of the game is to put the ball in the hole, you could just pick the ball up and put it in the hole, but that wouldn't be playing golf. And it also really wouldn't be much of a game or much fun, right? The rules and the constraints actually provide the opportunity to work against something and to figure out how to solve the problem. And by using the constraint, you actually have fun in overcoming the obstacle. So it's play-like in a sense. I mean, it's not, we're not constantly playing, but there is so much about the way this activity is structured that is playful. And I think that that's what draws a person in to continue to work.
Also building something, when it's your process, if you're painting, are you playing? If you're building something, are you playing? You know, that sort of thing. Are you you're using maybe some of the same techniques over and over again, but the more you use them, the more you understand them, the more capable you are of extending the technique or the results that you get, because you're involved with it. You're actively thinking and engaged in a process that does involve your intellect. So it may not look like play, but the students have to really work through these things and make decisions about stuff. It's kind of like we said, that play isn't always exactly about the word fun, but it is fun to build something, and it is fun to accomplish something in the end, and you can feel good about it, and you have the confidence that you can create further from it. So I think that, you know, that's one of the reasons I wanted to bring this up, because how do you talk about creativity in something that seems to have a product in the end? And I think that allowing those kind of choices to be made. We're not all, I've seen some students or some places where if they're teaching how to build something, everybody makes the same thing. And I would just rather do something else than have everybody just make the same thing. There might be some good aspects of doing that, but I really feel like giving the choice makes you more engaged in the process intellectually, you know, as far as thinking about stuff and how you choose to begin to discover your own pathway, your own things that you like or are valuable to you. So
I do want to add, there's something contradictory when you first explore a new material. It's an open game. You don't come with preconceived ideas. You play and experiment. And you made the point that the more you know the materials, the sort of, you know, it does open up so many more doors. But at the same time, you then know what you did in the past with the materials. And so in some odd way, you're narrowing down your creativity, or maybe you're focusing it to a point. So there is that somewhat contradiction. And I often think some artists who explore something, they realize after a while, okay, got to change radically to get back to that sense of creativity and play and exploration. I do want to read something that was Alyssa Pritzker asked. She says, interesting conversation. And can you expand on the topic of mistakes? And I guess obviously maybe the importance and the use of mistakes. Maybe how play facilitates that.
So yeah, I think I'd like to so young children are a window on humans. And many of the things that young children do teach us about what humanity is like in a sort of a simple kind of way that then we can see from. When a child learns to walk, no one quits learning to walk because they fall down. They get up and they do it again, and they get up and they do it again, and then they get up and they do it again until they're, toddler age, when they're like running and they've stopped walking. The thing about mistakes is that they really teach us about what to do with this stuff. And when there's nothing riding on the mistake but learning from it, it's illuminating. So if we think about those four, that creative process, where it starts with preparation or ideation and then incubation, the next one is illumination. I think that that's part of that. It's like the learning piece. And then you get to the verification, like, yes, this is what I want to do. But I think that there's a way in which the mistakes actually illuminate the way forward for us. I know that when I have writer's block, and I can't write at all, one of the things I will do is list all the things I have to do, or all the parts of the paper. And then I look at them and I say to myself, I can't face that one. I can't face that. Oh, but I can do that one. That's really easy. And so I start with the one that I can do the easiest, and then it tells me about the other ones. I think that that's a piece of what mistakes do for us, if we can stay open and not be defeated by that aspect of mistake. I'm forgetting his name because this wasn't one of the ones I've prepared, but there's a scientist who used to have he wrote a book called Ignorance a few years ago. I can't remember his name, but he had a seminar that he ran for his students, and he used to invite his science colleagues. He was a historian, but he would invite a lot of his colleagues to the seminar, and he would ask them to tell the students about their ignorance. And why is that? Because we often teach history and we often teach high school science as though they were closed, as though there were already an answer, when in fact the work of a historian, the work of a scientist, is actually to uncover new questions. You're always at the edge. So in a way, you're standing on a balloon, and as you learn more, you're filling the balloon with what you know, and you're always on the edge of what you don't know. You're expanding your ignorance. A really good question is one that gives you more questions rather than the one that you can seal and answer. So that's a roundabout way of talking about mistakes. However, I really think that the way to bring it back to play is that when you're focused on the process and not on the product, the mistakes are instructive. And they can actually be like, oh, I get it now, which is such a joyful moment. And then you have the energy to do it again. I think I better stop.
No, it's good. I mean, one of those things that happens with me is like a student will ask me how to do something, and I'll say, well, I think you should do it this way. Here's why, and blah, blah, blah. And they'll say, but I want to try blah, blah. I say, I'll say, go ahead, go ahead, try it. And it'll either work or it won't work. And that's a learning experience for them. So that's.
I want to recognize Babs Rangel. She's written something in the comment section. And Babs, go ahead, share with us. She brings a little art history context to our conversation.
Oh, good.
Oh, well, I can share a little bit about that, but I also wanted to, the comment in there is about this recent watching of the assistant to Rauschenberg, who was his assistant for a good part of Rauschenberg's life. and his life. And how he just was fascinated about when he got to Rauschenberg. Rauschenberg picked him because he came with his portfolio of all these different things that he had experimented with in his own study at Rhode Island School of Design. He was 26 when he joined Rauschenberg. So, 30 years later, has done all this work for Rauschenberg. And Rauschenberg had said to him, he goes, we're going to have a lot of fun making art, and we're going to experiment. There's all these things you've done, and I want to like play around with all these things that you've done. And so the thoughts that also crossed my mind is I'm a very process-oriented artist as well. And I don't think of things as mistakes. When I taught way back, I used to tell everybody there is no such thing as a mistake. This is just you figuring things out. And in fact, I have a whole body of work that came from what you might think of as a mistake, or just being aware, this idea of being in the present when you're making the work. And so it was fascinating. This guy had all this stuff on the stage, and he was pulling out this and showing this process and that process. And it was, and a lot of his talk, there were times where he wasn't even making sense, but the overall sense you got was that they constantly were in a form of experimentation. And when I started, for example, these stain painting pieces that I made out of rust and tea, the whole process of putting the two together was a mistake. Something was on the floor, it hit something else. You pick it up and you see this mark, and then you realize one object can make a mark on another object, and then it just kept on going. And I thought, well, what if I did this, or what if I did that? And I also like to think of, I don't think of it as play as much as also curiosity. Children have an incredible amount of curiosity about everything. And so if you're constantly curious, you research things, you go down rabbit holes, you do that, but you also do the same thing in your art. So anyway, that's my 2 cents to what I think of as, and I just wonder at the word play, because to me, it has, it's just another form of saying curious or experimentation, or just what you're doing every day.
Well, I want to thank you, Babs. That's why I asked the question about mistake, because when you do something that it maybe has to be used like a chair, you need to be sure that you can sit on it. But within the studio and the arts, I also agree with Babs that the word mistake, many scientists said in the lab, they discover things when the things were differently planned. Yep. And it appears that sometimes they save humanity with certain findings. But that's why the word, and especially with kids, it's a little bit like, maybe it sounds like a little bit hard, the word mistake, but we are talking, and maybe that's the word that we are using. But I thank you, Babs, and I think that is a very interesting conversation, this one. And we all have these moments in the studio that we say, oh, I wanted to do it this way, and the materials tells you to go another way. I think that we all, most of us, or maybe all experimented that, that kind of thing.
Exactly.
I do want to read a few of the comments. Larry Wheatman says, all of my shows have been born from mistakes. Rubber was a mistake. Peg Riley says, the author of the book Ignorance is Stuart Firestein.
Yes. That's right.
And Lori Horowitz says, making art is a cross between hard work, problem solving, and enlightenment. It is more often work rather than play. Fran Beeler quotes Ignorance, How It Drives Science by Stuart Firestein. And I can tell you, I did watch a show recently, Explain, and we all know penicillin was a mistake. Quite often when scientists were in the lab, they'd lick their fingers and they'd realize this is sugary and sweet. And so they say today, nobody's licking their fingers in the laboratory. So many things have been evolved from mistakes. Yoram Gelman poses another thought. When a child falls while learning to walk, it is not a mistake. Anyway, walking is a goal. There is not play involved. And Olga Alexander says, it may be helpful, may be playful, but that is different from art. Being restricted by certain rules produces art that looks like something else or whatever is acceptable. Art is not always for the sake of a product. Regina Silvers, playing is my favorite part of my practice. Nice to hear. And I'll let you go on. I'll let you both go on.
So I just want to say that Stuart Brown does not, so I think it's a cultural thing that we oppose work with play. And in fact, Stuart Brown says the opposite of play is not work, it's depression. And Peter Gray has written about play, and he says, when work takes on as many of the characteristics of play, it's actually more productive and enjoyable. It's not, work is not the opposite of play. It's alongside of play, or it can be very playful. Barbara has her hand up.
Yes, I find it hard to type, but what my comment really is this thing I think that other artists here are sort of like pushing against in terms of that project of a piece of furniture that's so practical and goal-oriented, in the sense that play, and I think this is also in the studio a lot, is that your goals are very fluid. In art, a lot of times your goals become fluid. And that's just what I wanted to say, where, instead of like thinking of it in terms of like something goal oriented and it has to be a certain way, that those mistakes are sometimes the most wonderful things that happen in the studio. It's where you all of a sudden you get the muse or a new connection happens, and then you have a new goal, and it is playful and fluid. So I just wanted to sort of express that. Thank you.
Yeah, sometimes during the process of building those pieces, like somebody will turn something upside down, or the cutoff piece becomes the most important piece. Those things happen during that process too. Like, wow. We are looking for those things. And I think that's one of the things I talk about with the students is, it's like, if you're doing everything digital, it's all coming out of your head. You need to have an environment where you can have drops, you can have mistakes, you can have unexpected combinations of things by working with physical materials. So there's that opportunity within that practice as well to learn from those kinds of things. And mistakes, like we say, are they're instructive to us. They tell us what works, what doesn't work, what we like, ask us questions like, why didn't it work? How can I make it work? These are all like little things that are very important in the process of being a creative person. So just because they might have, I think because of like in furniture in particular, as opposed to the other class I teach, the one with the cyanotypes, is unknown outcome for the cyanotypes. What's that project going to lead to? I don't know. And I want you to go on that journey and figure out what it is. The furniture we have to be a little bit more practical about, because there are materials involved, and we have to sort of respect those materials. But I still feel like when you're practicing, when you're making, when you're working, you're learning, and you're involved with the intellectual process. And it should be playful to you, because it's going to allow you to continue to grow and make more and more things that are more playful. And it's just like learning about all the materials that we work with as artists. We have to learn, we have to know them, we have to become familiar with them, and then we can be really much more creative with them. And we do that by playing with them.
Should I go back?
Yeah, you go and do you.
All right, I'm gonna take a piece further down the road. I have to, well, you're gonna have to see all the way through this, but don't show. Well, all right, I'll tell you about it. I wanted to skip it, but I have given people to think about drawing as play, because I think we do a disservice to children when we show them how to draw. And I'm talking about really young children under the age of 5. Because when children engage in drawing, they don't, when children that young engage in drawing, they're really not engaged in making images. They're engaged in playing with the medium and finding out what it can do. So when we provide drawing materials to children, they're not goal-oriented, but they are definitely intentional about what they're doing. In the 1960s, Rhoda Kellogg did a study of tens of thousands of pieces of children's art. And what she was able to do was to codify a set of basic scribbles. And you can see all the marks. And if you think about the kinds of marks that you can make if you only have one joint, thinking about Kathy Topol's exercise that you do in the body, these are the kinds of marks that you can make if you only have one. They're figuring out what kinds of marks they can make, but they're not only figuring out what kinds of marks they can make, they're also figuring out where to place them on the page. And it turns out that when we look at a piece such as this one, where the corner is marked, and we say, oh, there's all that empty space. Are you sure you're done? Don't you want to add more? We're actually interrupting what Rhoda Kellogg called a child's building of visual gestalts, or what the Israeli artist Dan Agmon called their visual vocabulary. So children are actually intentionally figuring out what kind of marks they can make and where they can place them. And when they do this intentionally, it's teaching them about the visual organization of the world. So I'm just going to show you some examples of children's art. These are pieces that their teachers gave me. These are the ones the kids left behind. Most of them didn't have names on them. And I've collected them for this purpose. So you can see here's one where the center is marked. This one fills the whole page. This one is that strange half, horizontal half. Here's another one of those with a little bit of a fan going on. Here's one of those fans coming out of the corner. This is another one where you can see a child is actually creating something figurative, and I'll talk about that, but they have placed intentionally the two figures only on one side of the page. They're satisfied with that configuration. And it's good if we can let them keep going. Here's another one, just to see. And so we can return to the non-literality, because when children learn what kinds of marks they can make and where they can place them on the page, suddenly these squiggles and marks and circles and lines they can become a something. That's the pretend part. That's the make-believe part, or non-literality of play. And they do so intentionally, and we have emotional experiences. Children get joy out of their products, but when they first sit down to engage, what draws them in and keeps them there is the process. As they get older, of course, we know that you're balancing product and process all the time, and you as artists know them better than I do, actually. But I think it's good to think about non-literality and how important it is, because within the play frame, the usual meaning of objects and actions and situations is ignored, and new meanings are substituted. This allows children to experiment with new possibilities without the ordinary constraints. So we're talking about the pretend part or the imaginary. This leads us to symbolic thinking. And when we think about it, internal reality takes over. Our Johnson, Christie, and Wardle have written that it takes precedence over external reality, and objects and actions in play take on new play-related meanings. So I want you to consider the poker chip, which as a piece of plastic has no value. But if you're playing high-stakes poker, we know how much value it has. The same is true if you want to win a game of checkers and you're out there trying to get kinged. Suddenly, that checker has much more value. And certainly the same thing is true for NFTs. So in pretend play, One thing can stand for another. In this way, Lev Vygotsky pointed out that play makes a distancing between the word we call it and the object itself. So children begin to understand that the thought and the object are not the same. Children who speak more than one language already have a head up on that, but okay. So this leads to symbolic thinking, reading, writing, algebra, musical notation. So I like to say that the moment a child takes a bite out of a cracker and sees a sailboat or the moon is actually the dawn of abstract thought. Creative confidence is believing in your ability to influence the world around you. It's the conviction that you can achieve what you set out to do. And I think that the enormous sense of accomplishment that we have is due to seeing that when I pushed the button, the music came out, it's much more than that. Because I created the kind of music that's going to come out. So I try to help my students see that they needn't give their students models, that it's better to give them the materials, to talk with them about the techniques, to show them the possibilities, and then see what arises, rather than impose this idea. If you ask a young child, a three-year-old, who's not doing anything figurative yet, what did you make when they come and they show you your drawing? You're communicating to them that they were supposed to make us something, rather than, wow, look how hard you worked. Look at the shapes you made. I see you collected them all on the diagonal. That's a lot of vocabulary, and it's a concept, and it's very exciting. So I get my students involved by getting them to play with me. And in the materials class, I've asked them first to start with natural materials. So I'm going to show you some things that my students have created. And this is one. She lives in a condo and she has to take down her plants in the fall. So she had to take down her hostas. And this is what she made with them. Here are a bunch more, and you can see that some of them are figurative, others of them are just aesthetic. And then I asked them to do some 3D creations, and I've asked them to use whatever they have around. Now that we can't be in the class, we're not in the classroom, anything you have at home is great. And so here are 3 of my favorites. I'm particularly fond of the forks, but there you go. And so finally, what I want to say is that there is an enormous relationship between play and creativity because humans think in playful ways. It is how we learn. And it is how we learn to solve problems, to think divergently, to think of multiple ways of going about things. And so teachers have an important role. And in their book, Isabel and Yoshizawa wrote a book called Nurturing Creativity. They say that the role of the teacher is to inspire, to encourage, and provide time for play to support the development of creative thinkers. So here's a list of stuff. I guess it should get into the recording so that in case you wanted to go back and see any of them, you could, but I'm going to stop sharing here and then we can hear comments and questions.
I think first our ATOA round of applause for that. What a nice presentation. I hardly read most of what was in the chat. You definitely inspired people to think and also to quote many great thinkers, but I think you woke some of us with different ideas. Again, something very simple and very complex. I'll open it up to any comments anybody would like to make. Feel free to jump in. Loudest one first goes.
I want to repeat what Lawrence Wheaton wrote, what Picasso said. I'm always doing that which I cannot do in order that I may learn how to do it. And I'm a big fan of that because I have an MFA in painting, but I'm essentially doing more sculpture than I am doing painting. And everything I've learned or developed is all by experimentation, but I also had other artists teach me along the way because I wanted to learn how to cast. So I asked this person, will you teach me how to do this? Will you teach that sort of thing? So it opens up these possibilities to creativity, to ask, to learn other types of methods. And I like that Picasso said that. Where's Lawrence? Lawrence is here somewhere. Anyway, thank you for that thought. That was just my thought on his thought.
Yes, Sandra?
Yeah, thank you very much. I really enjoy that. One of my specialties and something I've studied all my life is the creative process. So I really enjoyed this. I had asked for a list of the definition of play because I had never seen it listed so eloquently and so concisely. I wanted to talk about or ask you about the subconscious, particularly in Raymond's work, because as I was seeing, for instance, the chair with the branches or whatnot coming out and the fluorescent light and the figure, for me, there's a conversation there.
Mhm.
I always think of a conversation within an artwork, or certainly between. I can call my artwork, you know, a little family. So I always work in 2 or 3 so we could have a conversation. So I think that what comes out of that is really the subconscious. And I was thinking of what you believe the chair is saying to the branch or to the light bulb, or you know what's going on there. And what I think artists do is bring the subconscious to a higher level by presenting it visually or in terms of words, however, so that we can talk about it. I mean, that's the intellectual cognitive development that we are all enjoying today. When it remains below that level, there's no communication. And some unfortunates do remain below that level. They cannot rate, you know, they're so constructed or whatever, or so traumatized that it does not, the visual image, which is the first to develop, you know, developmentally, we have to visualize before we can do. And I think that both of you brought that out so beautifully. But I would, you know, if there were time, I would love to have a conversation about what your pieces are saying to each other.
I
'Cause
would. That'd be interesting.
yeah. Oh, that's the subconscious talking, you know, to raise it. Now that you've made it concrete, you've concretized your visualization, you can have a conversation. It's okay.
Yeah. It's interesting, those things, that the way they I think all of us probably have the experience of, like, if you sit down, it's you sit down or stand up or whatever it is that you're going to make a piece of art. I like the fact that I don't know what's going to happen.
Mhm.
I just love that, because it's like I might search around for like hours finding the right piece or just looking for something, and to get things rolling and to make those connections. And it's one of the most beautiful things I think about making art that particular way, is just like, I just don't know what's going to happen. But once it starts happening, I can't stop it. that sort of a thing. I think maybe that's an experience that probably all of us have and can share, is that once we start, we were talking a little bit about Rudolf Arnheim, and he's got a definition for art. If you're interested, I could tell you what his definition for
Yeah,
art.
sure.
It's kind of funny. He had this really deep sort of German voice, and he would say, what is art? And then he'd say, art, everything in the world is art. Total cop out, right? But he said, some things more, some things less. So now you have a continuum that you can kind of place things on, and you can sort of figure out, like, oh, is this a little more? Is this a little less? You know, and you can be concerned about it or not concerned about it. But and then the other thing he did that was kind of relieving, and Aviva has done this, I think, with her class, with her students, is said, you don't have to worry about being creative. Here's a piece of paper. I'll give everybody in this room a piece of paper, and you put a rectangle on that, and I'll collect them all. And every rectangle is in a different spot, a different size, a different placement on the page. You don't have to worry about it. You just have to let it go is kind of what I'm saying is like, as far as that goes.
It's interesting because I use that exercise actually in my assessment class when we move from learning about standardized tests to other ways of actually assessing. We spend a lot more time in the class on other ways of assessing what children are learning or how they're learning. And, I say, look, I've given you standard equipment and standard instructions, and we have 100% success, and no two rectangles are the same.
Well, I
like,
want to
what's
thank you
missing?
for,
What are we not learning from standardized testing, that we need to learn, that's actually more useful for a teacher in ongoing work. Incidentally, the other thing I wanted to say, even though I know Sandra's statement was about the subconscious, the developmental psychologist Jean Piaget has been quoted as saying, play is the answer to how does anything new ever come about.
yes, I want to thank you for bringing the images of the kids. That was very refreshing. I want to add that I had the opportunity to teach kids long ago, and I remember one I want to share because this is an example of what the young kids, like you said, express themselves. And I remember a kid that did a huge head and very tiny body, and I asked the kid and I said, what is your, tell me about your drawing. And he said, well, I have a headache. And so we know that they express their feelings so well, and correct them is just, if we want to talk about mistakes, that's a big mistake.
Yeah.
Just to talk about mistakes, because they know how to express. That's why the sizes of parents change depending on the moment. Sometimes they are big father, small mother, huge mother, big sister. This is really very interesting to observe. And I think that one of the things that I experienced was to ask questions instead of telling, oh, that's this or that. Because, you ask the question what it is, they will tell you what it is, no assuming, because you don't want to infer into their feelings, what it is. They know better than what we perceive. But
Yes.
Thank you for the drawings. They were delicious. Thank you.
They're fun. I love them.
I want to comment on Elisa's little commentary, because I was thinking about this too. I used to teach little kids as well way back at the Albright Knox, and I had groups. I had the 4 and 5 year olds, then I had the 6 and 7 year olds, and I had the 8 and 9 year olds. And the incredible work that used to come out of the 4 and 5 year olds was so fascinating to watch. And it was also fascinating to see what happened to children as time went on and other teachers had gotten to them or told them they shouldn't do this or that. The intimidation, the freeness of the 4 and 5 year olds was so amazing to watch. And in fact, I also kept drawings that they left behind, and I used to be an art director for psychology textbooks, and tried to use one of the drawings on a book about children's psychology. But in the end, they didn't want to use it, which was amazing to me because it was the perfect thing to put on the book, this completely uninhibited a method of expressing themselves. But it was also real sad to teach the 8 and 9 year olds in many respects, where you saw the ones that were really, how much it changed from that time period. It was just fascinating to watch.
I'd like to piggyback on that because I teach middle school and high schoolers, so even a little older. And that age, kids love to learn skills and learn how to draw certain things. And the hardest part is when I need to get them to think creatively and come up with something interesting, unique, and that shows their own personality. And some of them are great. Some of them are so creative. It's a joy. But some of them are just like they freeze up, they get very tense, very stressed. They don't know what I'm talking about. They're like, oh my God, what do you want? Like, just please tell me what to do. And that's, of course, the opposite of what you want to do when you want to bring out someone's creativity. So the challenge is always to find a way, like a chink in that kind of art fence that's built around them, telling them that certain things are okay or not okay.
Yeah, with my students too, actually, when I introduce drawing to them, because I'm not teaching it from an art perspective, I'm teaching it as a material and as something to play with. And so to get them away from the notion that they should draw a something, so that I'm not getting either the classic landscape with the sun in the corner and the flowers, and or just just the flowers, the writing of their names. Like, I just want them to play with the crayon. So I have to really, I give them one black crayon and I tell them, you can peel it, you can break it, try all the different surfaces. And I often do that Kathy Topol exercise first, so that they get into the physicality of it, because I want them to just play with the medium. Then I add a color, and then sort of later I will, say, okay, you're free. But I do add that constraint because it is so hard for them to get away from the notion of creating a something. Interestingly, Barry talked about exploration and experimentation and play. It's interesting to know that exploration comes before play, really. And it's usually you explore something you're not familiar with, you play with something you are familiar with. And it turns out that the way we explore is much more standard, and the way people play is actually much more varied. So there's an inherent contradiction there that I think is really, really interesting. But in fact, when you get the new phone or the new whatever it is, people mess around with it, sort of, but what they do with it is pretty much the same. And when they learn it, then the sky's the limit, right? I think there's something about that that's very, very compelling. That play sort of comes after you get to experiment. But in order to experiment freely and to not be constrained by our preconceived notions or by what we want the outcome to be, we actually have to be playful and very process oriented.
I think that's a great note for us to end our talk. Obviously, you opened up a lot of food for thought. I will say this talk will be on our YouTube channel, so feel free to go back. Yes, another round of applause for Ray and Aviva. Very inspiring. I do want to thank Fran Beeler and mention Fran is a member of the board of ATOA. Thank you for coming in from Maine and joining us. One thought I want to leave you with. Earlier, you mentioned thinking and sort of play in the relationship, or at least you hinted at it. And I know in my own practice, I like to work really quickly, and I like to say, so I get beyond thinking. But I actually don't. I think I get behind frontal lobe thinking, and I tune in to my more primitive thinking. And as artists, I know when I'm doing that, and I can actually hear myself trying to think and know that I've moved past that in my doing. And I think that speaks to your point. In the doing, there is a thinking, and it's maybe not a very structured frontal brain thinking, but it's another thinking that has been around longer, that is sort of ingrained in us. Again, thank everybody. I want to thank everybody here. You all brought brilliant thoughts. We all, again, it's our hive, it's our tribe. We sort of come together, and at our best, we inspire each other, and we learn from each other. Next week, we have Lori Horowitz, who's here. Hi, Lori. She'll be presenting a talk with some friends. And again, anything you want to know about ATOA is on our website, ATOA NYC. Thank you all so much. This has been great. Thank you.
Yes, it has. Wonderful.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks, Barry.
Sorry,
Thanks,
Nina.
Fran.
Nice to meet all of you.
Thanks,
Thanks. Thanks, Aviva.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Very
Ann.
neat.
It was
And it's-
great.
And especially thank you, Barry.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Welcome.
Yeah,
My
thank you,
pleasure.
Sharon. Thank you for
Bye.
the opportunity.
You're welcome.